It's Michael Caputo. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I appreciate it. I want you to check out my podcast, stillstandingpodcast.com. I do these videos once a week, like 10 minutes on the issue of the day as part of stillstandingpodcast.com. Go there. You can sign up for an email to be updated whenever I put up like 50 minutes of audio every week, an occasional blog post, and a weekly video like this one. I spent a little time on television, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, but you only get 7 minutes at a time. Even you got to split that up with other people. So I get a little more time here on my iPhone to say more of what I mean and more of what I think, and appreciate you listening in. This week we're all talking about Andrew McCabe's new book. It's coming out next week. Apparently made some news this week with an interview he's done on 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes does a really good job promoting their Sunday broadcast by letting out one clip a week on something that's newsworthy. And the big clip this week was about how McCabe talked about Rod Rosenstein and everybody else apparently in Maine State, the headquarters office, the politically appointed office, not Maine State, of Maine Justice, the Department of Justice political appointees, including Rosenstein and others. McCabe was deputy director of the FBI at the time, and he talked about how Rosenstein was looking into invoking the Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. Section 4 was actually brought in 1967. It allows for a majority vote of the president's cabinet, including the vice president, to vote to remove the president from office because they are unable, through health reasons, it appears. I'm not an attorney, but that's what it looks like to me. Unable to conduct his duties as president of the United States. Now, apparently Rosenstein, after the firing of FBI Director James Comey, which, by the way, Rosenstein had recommended to the president in a memo, once he was surprised by the president's firing of James Comey, something, by the way, that Democrats were begging for in 2016. He decided the president was too erratic, and he had actually tried to convince people to record the president in one-on-one conversations to document the chaos in the White House. And this big splash out of 60 Minutes, McCabe talked about how he was also trying to count heads in the cabinet. Members of Maine Justice were helping him do a soft count like the whip does in the House and in the Senate, who would vote for this and who would not. Now, remember, this is not the first time we've heard of this. This came out in September 21st in the New York Times. Two very good journalists, Michael Schmidt and Adam Goldman, came out with this very same story and attributed it to a group of people, not just one. But we all knew that the person organizing the story was the vengeful Andy McCabe. He had just been fired just a few days before his retirement vested, for lying 4 times, 3 times under oath, and pretty much disgraced. So he decided he was going to take down Rosenstein as well. But it's Schmidt and it's Goldman, and I believed it. And at the time on television and radio, I called for Rosenstein to be fired. If you remember, the Department of Justice, I was entertained by this. The Department of Justice put out an unnamed source who said that Rod Rosenstein was only kidding when he was talking about the 25th Amendment and just joshing when he was talking about recording the president secretly to try to prove chaos in the White House. I don't know about you, but I don't think about Rod Rosenstein as some kind of a guy who walks around the office with a joy buzzer trying to zap people. I don't find him funny at all. I wanted him fired, and he went off and met the president somehow. The president decided to keep him on. At the time, he was still overseeing the Mueller investigation. But according to McCabe, in this interview with 60 Minutes that's been put out there and coverage of it, this was a real serious effort, that Rosenstein really did want somebody to record the president, and that he was quite seriously counting heads to try to figure out which members of the cabinet could be counted on to vote to remove the president under the 25th Amendment, Section 4, and if the vice president could be counted on as well. And they did it for several days, the better part of a week, it appears, until about, I guess it was May 9th when James Comey was fired, and it was May 17th when Rosenstein decided to appoint a special counsel. So he looked for a way to invoke the 25th Amendment's Section 4 to remove the president. When he realized there wasn't support for this, he appointed a special counsel to tie the president's hands completely for the next 2 years with a bogus Russia investigation. That's what Rosenstein did. Listen, I know that it's hard to believe McCabe. And we also see that McCabe was very seriously involved in this 25th Amendment gambit as well, and is part of the same cabal. And there's more than McCabe and Rosenstein involved. I'd like to know who they are. But, as far as I'm concerned, Schmidt and Goldman were right in September of 2018. But, I went off on this on social media, and friends of mine people who follow me on Twitter, I thought it sounded a lot like a coup. Soft, hard, administrative, whatever. Members of the main justice office were trying to remove the president. Now, mind you, this is a health reason as far as I can tell. And lawyers I've spoken to said that it's a health reason. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein was not a member of the cabinet. So what was he going to do next? If he and his little cabal over there in Main Justice had figured out that there was indeed a majority, or at least close to a majority, on the cabinet who would vote for this, and that the vice president would play ball, what were they going to do next? Really? What was their next step? I want to know. You should want to know too. Were they planning on going to Jeff Sessions, who at the time was still quite loyal to the president of the United States, and the president was loyal to him, and try to convince Jeff Sessions that he needed to go to his the other members of the president's cabinet? Rosenstein wasn't attorney general. Mueller hadn't been appointed yet. But of course, we know that Jeff Sessions had already recused himself of situations to do with the Russia allegations, with campaign-oriented investigations. But that didn't mean that he recused himself from discussions of the 25th Amendment. Rosenstein wasn't going to have any input on that. Who was he going to recruit to try and be that person who went from, cabinet member to cabinet member, who eventually sat down with the vice president and said, "Oh, President Trump cannot, conduct the duties of president of the United States." Starts sounding like a conspiracy to me. I'm not an attorney, but I can think of a pretty mid-level prosecutor, an unremarkable prosecutor, who could start making a case that this looks like a conspiracy. This little cabal at Main Justice. But see, the people on Twitter who were, mostly Trump haters, and people who were correcting me and saying, listen, this has happened. It happened in 1987 to Ronald Reagan. I looked it up. It's true. I didn't remember that. But in 1987, a guy named James Cannon, who had been in the White House for just a couple of days, came in with Howard Baker when Baker replaced Don Regan. You remember when Don Regan was fired in 1987? And James Cannon, who apparently wasn't much of a Reagan supporter, he was, from Gerald Ford's White House. I think he was head of economic or domestic policy or something like that, in Gerald Ford's White House. He decided that he had heard too many times from staff in the White House that President Reagan was, despondent and not conducting his duties and not, capable of really being president anymore, and that we needed to take a look at the 25th Amendment, Section 4, to see if it was time to remove Ronald Reagan as president. He actually put this in a memo to Chief of Staff, the new Chief of Staff, Howard Baker. Now, they, Baker and Cannon and others loyal to Baker, who came in with Baker, who were new to the office of the White House, new to the White House staff, decided to set up a meeting with President Reagan to look at him very closely to see if he was really capable of serving as president of the United States. And according to some of the coverage from 1988, because this all came out, James Cannon's memo and what they did to follow up, to figure out if Reagan was fit, came out in a book just a year and a half or so after Cannon wrote that memo. A book written by a woman named Mayer out of the Wall Street Journal. It was actually a very popular book, a lot of coverage of this account, which had been leaked, just like the 60 Minutes interview, to try and sell this book. Just like McCabe went to 60 Minutes to sell his book. history repeats itself in a lot of ways. But at the time, they actually sat around the president in a conference room at the White House, and they actually took different angles around him so they could look at him from different perspectives to see if he was nuts, I guess, or despondent, or depressed, or whatever. And we find out from this book and the coverage of that, this story from the book, so similar to McCabe's story. I guess Baker said, "Oh, we figured out very quickly that the president was fine. It was all fine." And Cannon said, "Oh, it was all fine. Everything was fine." But the president, President Reagan was pissed, and the vice president was pissed, and everybody who was loyal to Ronald Reagan was very angry that this new guy in the White House, James Cannon, after just being there a couple of days, decided they needed to look at the 25th Amendment. This nobody, who was a staffer at the Ford White House, decided it might be time to remove President Reagan from office. I guess he was upset about the Iran-Contra scandal, but who wouldn't be upset about that? Just like the president today is upset about the bogus Russia investigation. So Cannon wrote this memo. They figured out that the president was, fine to stick around. Apparently he met James Cannon's expectations. But we find out that James Cannon only stayed in the White House for a couple of weeks. Soon after that meeting where they secretly were judging the president's capacity to serve, he left. And according to Mayer's book, he left for health reasons. He did not stick around to serve Baker in the White House for health reasons. Now, every account I can see about James Cannon is that he lived in good health for a long, long time. If he left the White House in 1987, no reports of him having cancer or anything like that. In fact, he just passed away in 2011 at the ripe old age of 93 years old. Bad health, apparently. James Cannon left the White House because people started finding out about his memo recommending the 25th Amendment be looked at, Section 4. I'm sure the Reagan loyalists in the West Wing were like, who is this Cannon guy? Why did he do this? Who did he think he was? And I'm quite sure the Chief of Staff, Baker, went to Cannon and said, look, you got to go, my friend. That memo might have been a good idea at the time, but it's ruined your stay here at the White House. And James Cannon, he split. Good health, it seems, not bad health. As far as I'm concerned, I realize now that it's not a coup. I said, what kind of coup is this on Twitter? It's legal to do this. It's the 25th Amendment, Section 4. I mean, if you're a member of the administration, I guess a member of the cabinet, you can look at this as a reason, as a way to decide whether or not the president has the capacity, the health capacity, mental and physical and otherwise, to serve his term as president. But Cannon had no business talking about it, and neither did Rod Rosenstein, neither did Andrew McCabe. And by the way, McCabe got fired anyway. I believe that Rod Rosenstein should look at what happened to James Cannon. I believe Rod Rosenstein should meet the same fate that James Cannon did. Rod Rosenstein needs to resign for health reasons. Now, as far as I'm concerned, what he did was unconscionable. Who cares if Rod Rosenstein thinks the president is unfit for office? As far as I'm concerned, it's the cabinet's decision. As far as the Constitution is concerned, it's the cabinet's decision. Rod Rosenstein didn't even approach a cabinet officer. He needs to go. And the president, the second time around, even though this comes from lying Andy McCabe, he needs to fire Rod Rosenstein. Like now. Anyway, thanks for listening in. Check it out. I mean, I think there's this guy who wrote about this. It was really interesting. A journalist named Alan McDuffie. He wrote a post on Medium. He was actually researching the 25th Amendment and how it went down in 1987 under Reagan at the same time that Rosenstein and McCabe and all these guys at Maine Justice were trying to figure out a way to get rid of the president under the 25th Amendment. Pretty coincidental. I'm sure McDuffie doesn't know any of those guys at Maine Justice. And McDuffie posted that article that he was researching during the week that they were actually doing it at Maine Justice. He posted it in the morning of May 17th. and said this is how they tried to remove Reagan. And apparently McDuffie thought it was something we should look into with Trump. They were already looking into it while he was looking into it. And he posted on May 17th in the morning, and that day was the day that Rosenstein gave up on the whole gambit and appointed Robert Mueller. So Alan McDuffie, check him out. Apparently he's got a gift because he was thinking just like those folks at Maine Justice. I don't know if that's good for McDuffie, but the story at Medium was really prescient. Anyway, Michael Caputo for Still Standing, stillstandingpodcast.com. Thanks a lot for listening in, and have a great day.